Communicating with a narcissist can leave you feeling confused, frustrated, and emotionally drained. You walk into conversations hoping for understanding, only to walk out questioning yourself. You explain your intentions, defend your words, and try to stay calm, yet somehow the conversation still turns against you. When you communicate with a narcissist, one of the biggest traps you fall into is believing that if you could just explain yourself better, the conversation would finally make sense. You start adding more details, more examples, more background, hoping that clarity will lead to understanding. But with a narcissist, understanding is not the goal, control is. They are not listening to absorb your meaning, they are listening for something they can twist, challenge, or use to regain dominance in the conversation. This is why trying to be understood becomes emotionally exhausting. Every added sentence gives them more material to manipulate, more angles to question, and more opportunities to redirect the conversation away from the original issue. Clarity works differently. Clarity does not require agreement, approval, or emotional validation. Clarity simply means stating your position in a way that is clean, direct, and complete. Once your message has been expressed clearly, your responsibility ends. Whether they accept it, reject it, or distort it is no longer your burden. Many people stay trapped because they confuse clarity with persuasion. They believe communication only succeeds when the other person nods, agrees, or changes behavior. In reality, communication succeeds the moment you express your truth calmly and honestly, without self-betrayal. Narcissistic personalities often pretend not to understand in order to pull you back into explaining. They may say things like, "That's not what you said," or "You're contradicting yourself," or "You're being unclear." These statements are not genuine requests for clarity. They are tactics designed to make you doubt yourself. When you respond by over-explaining, you unintentionally hand them power. The conversation shifts from your boundary or concern into a trial where you feel pressured to prove your innocence. Being clear means choosing simple language and standing by it. It means saying what you mean once, without emotional overflow. For example, instead of listing 10 reasons for your decision, you state the decision itself. Instead of defending your intent, you state your position. Clear communication is brief because it does not need reinforcement. Lengthy explanations often signal uncertainty, even when you are certain. Narcissists are skilled at sensing that uncertainty and pressing on it. Another reason clarity is so effective is because it removes the emotional hook. When you aim to be understood, your emotions become involved. You want fairness, you want acknowledgement, you want recognition. When you aim to be clear, the focus shifts inward. You measure success by your own behavior rather than their reaction. This internal shift is what restores balance. You stop chasing emotional outcomes and start practicing emotional discipline. Clarity also creates consistency. When you repeat the same message without changing your wording, the narcissist loses momentum. They thrive on confusion and emotional escalation. Clear statements repeated calmly act like a wall they cannot climb. You are no longer reacting, you are responding. You are no longer negotiating your boundaries, you are stating them. Most importantly, clarity protects your sense of self. You stop questioning whether you said something wrong, whether you sounded harsh, whether you should have worded it differently. You know what you said because it was intentional. You said enough. You said it once, and you did not abandon yourself in the process. When dealing with a narcissist, your tone often matters more than your words. You can say the most reasonable thing in the world, but if your voice carries frustration, urgency, or emotion, the conversation will immediately shift. Narcissistic personalities are highly attuned to emotional signals. They may ignore logic completely, yet react instantly to tone. A raised voice, a defensive edge, or even a rushed explanation can become their leverage. Once emotion enters your delivery, the focus is no longer on what you said, but on how you said it. This is why regulating your tone before you respond is critical. Regulation does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending nothing bothers you. It means choosing not to let emotion drive your communication. When you respond while emotionally activated, your nervous system takes control. Words come faster than thought. Your voice tightens. Your breathing shortens. In that state, you are far more likely to say something you later regret or something that can be used against you. Narcissists often provoke emotional reactions intentionally. They interrupt, accuse, mock, or dismiss because emotional reactions give them control. Once your tone changes, they can shift the narrative. They may say you are too sensitive, overreacting, or out of control. At that point, the original issue disappears, replaced by an argument about your behavior. This is not accidental, it is strategic. Regulating your tone begins before you speak, not while you are speaking. A pause can completely change the direction of the conversation. Slowing your breathing, relaxing your shoulders, and allowing silence creates space between stimulus and response. That space is where control lives. Silence often feels uncomfortable, especially when someone is pressuring you, but it prevents impulsive reactions. A calm pause communicates confidence far more than immediate replies. A steady tone also disrupts their expectations. When someone is used to getting emotional reactions, calmness can feel disarming. Short sentences delivered slowly reduce opportunities for misinterpretation. The fewer emotional cues you give, the less material they have to work with. Calm speech creates predictability. and predictability limits manipulation. It's important to understand that a regulated tone is not passive. It is intentional. You are not being quiet because you are afraid. You're being measured because you are choosing control. Even firm boundaries can be delivered calmly. In fact, boundaries are stronger when emotion is absent. Emotion invites debate. Calmness signals finality. Another benefit of tone regulation is self-protection. When your voice remains steady, your body receives a signal of safety. This keeps your stress response from escalating. You remain mentally present instead of slipping into fight or flight. Over time, this changes how conversations feel internally. You stop bracing for conflict and start observing it from a grounded position. Regulating tone also changes how you perceive the interaction afterward. When you leave the conversation knowing you stayed composed, there is no lingering shame or self-criticism. You don't replay the conversation wondering why you reacted the way you did. Emotional restraint becomes empowering rather than restrictive. The goal is not to sound emotionless, but to sound intentional. Calm does not mean cold. It means controlled. When your tone is steady, your words land with more weight. You no longer need to convince, persuade, or prove anything. Your voice becomes the anchor, and the conversation can no longer pull you off balance. When a narcissist accuses you of something that feels unfair or completely untrue, your instinct is almost automatic. You want to correct the story. You want to explain what really happened. You want to make sure they don't walk away believing something false about you. This reaction is human, and it comes from a deep need for fairness. But in narcissistic communication, defending yourself rarely protects you. Instead, it places you directly into the role they want you to occupy. Distorted accusations are not meant to be resolved. They are meant to destabilize you. A narcissist may exaggerate events, twist your words, or assign intentions you never had. When you respond by defending yourself, you unknowingly accept the premise that their version of reality deserves equal weight. The conversation then shifts from your lived experience into a debate over their distortion. Once that happens, you are no longer communicating, you are being cross-examined. Defensiveness feeds the dynamic. The more you explain, the more they interrupt. The more evidence you offer, the more details they challenge. No amount of logic satisfies because logic was never the goal. What they seek is emotional engagement. Defending yourself provides that engagement in full. It signals that their accusation landed and that you now feel responsible to clean up their narrative. Another hidden cost of defending yourself is how it erodes your confidence. Over time, repeated accusations followed by forced explanations can make you second-guess your memory, your intentions, and even your character. You may start over preparing for conversations, rehearsing what you will say, or constantly clarifying yourself. This mental burden does not come from wrongdoing. It comes from being repeatedly placed on trial for things that do not require defense. Refusing to defend yourself does not mean agreeing with the accusation. It means declining to participate in a false frame. You are choosing not to argue inside a reality that was designed to trap you. When you respond with statements that acknowledge their perspective without validating it, you keep your footing. You are not denying their feelings, but you are not surrendering your truth either. Simple phrases can hold enormous power when delivered calmly. Statements such as, "That's not how I see it," or "I disagree with that characterization," prevent escalation because they do not invite debate. They communicate your position without opening the door to interrogation. You are not proving innocence, you are asserting autonomy. Distorted accusations often escalate when they fail to provoke the expected reaction. A narcissist may intensify the claim, repeat it louder, or add emotional pressure. This is the moment many people break and start defending harder. Staying grounded here is critical. Repeating your position without adding new explanations sends a clear message that the tactic is ineffective. When you stop defending yourself, the power dynamic shifts. The conversation no longer revolves around clearing your name. It centers on your boundaries. You reclaim control by refusing to argue against things that were never true to begin with. Your energy stays intact because you are no longer chasing fairness from someone unwilling to offer it. This approach also changes how you see yourself. You begin to recognize that integrity does not require constant explanation. People who know you do not need convincing. People who are committed to misunderstanding you cannot be persuaded. Letting go of the urge to defend becomes an act of self-respect. You are not avoiding accountability, you are refusing manipulation. Setting boundaries with a narcissist is often misunderstood as making strong speeches or delivering emotional ultimatums. Many people believe that if they just explain their limits clearly enough, the other person will finally respect them. In reality, long explanations weaken boundaries rather than strengthen them. The more words you use, the more openings you create for debate, manipulation, and dismissal. Narcissistic personalities rarely respond to emotional appeals or detailed reasoning. They respond to consistency and clarity. Short, neutral language is powerful because it removes emotion from the interaction. Emotion gives a narcissist something to push against. Neutral language gives them nothing. When your boundary sounds calm and simple, it is harder to argue with, not because it convinces them, but because it leaves no space for reinterpretation. A statement like, "I'm not available for that," stands on its own. It does not invite questions, justifications, or negotiations. Boundaries are not requests for permission. When they are delivered with excessive politeness or explanation, they start to sound like negotiations. A narcissist will sense that an attempt to bargain, guilt, or pressure you into changing your stance. Short statements prevent this shift. They communicate that the decision has already been made. You are informing, not asking. Neutral language also protects your emotional state. When boundaries are spoken with frustration or anger, they can escalate conflict quickly. The other person may accuse you of being dramatic or disrespectful, and suddenly the boundary itself is no longer the focus. Calm, emotionally flat delivery keeps the conversation anchored. It denies the opportunity for emotional reversal where you end up defending the boundary instead of enforcing it. Another important aspect of boundary setting is repetition. Narcissists often test limits repeatedly, not because they forgot, but because they want to see if pressure will change the outcome. When your response remains the same each time, the message becomes unmistakable. You are not persuading them with logic, you are teaching them through consistency. The same sentence delivered the same way sends a stronger signal than any explanation ever could. Short boundaries also help you avoid emotional fatigue. Long confrontations drain energy and increase self-doubt. Simple statements can serve both. You no longer feel the need to prepare arguments or anticipate counterpoints. Your role becomes clear and contained. You state the boundary and follow through if it is ignored. Neutral language does not mean passive behavior. It means controlled behavior. You can be firm without being hostile. You can be direct without being aggressive. A calm boundary communicates self-respect. It shows that your limits are not dependent on the other person's approval or understanding. Many people struggle because they expect boundaries to change the narcissist behavior immediately. That expectation leads to disappointment. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about controlling access to you. When enforced calmly, they reduce emotional chaos even if the other person remains difficult. Over time, short neutral boundaries reshape your internal experience. You stop bracing for arguments. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop feeling guilty for protecting yourself. The simplicity of your language reinforces the simplicity of your responsibility. You are not required to convince, justify, or prove your worth. You are only required to honor your limit and respond consistently when it is tested. Narcissists often rely on emotional bait to control conversations. The bait can come in many forms: sarcasm, insults, exaggerated accusations, sudden victimhood, or comments designed to provoke guilt or anger. These moments rarely appear accidental. They are strategically placed to pull you into an emotional reaction. Once you react emotionally, the balance of power shifts. The conversation is no longer about resolution or clarity. It becomes about who can dominate the emotional space. Power struggles thrive on reactions. When you raise your voice, defend yourself passionately, or attempt to correct every distortion, you unknowingly step into the arena they created. In that space, logic loses its value. Emotional intensity becomes the currency. Narcissistic personalities are often far more comfortable in emotional chaos than the people trying to reason with them. This is why arguments with them can feel endless and disorienting. Refusing emotional bait requires awareness before response. The moment you feel your heart rate increase, your chest tighten, or your thoughts speed up, that is the signal. That reaction is not weakness. It is information. It tells you that the conversation has shifted from communication to provocation. Recognizing that shift gives you the opportunity to step back instead of charging forward. Silence is one of the most effective tools in these moments. Not as punishment, not as withdrawal, but as regulation. A pause interrupts the momentum of manipulation. When you do not immediately respond, you deny the reward they are seeking. Many people fear silence because it feels like losing control. In reality, silence is often the moment control is reclaimed. Neutral responses also diffuse bait. Short statements delivered without emotional weight prevent escalation. You are not ignoring them, you are refusing to escalate with them. Emotional detachment does not mean indifference, it means discernment. You are choosing not to invest energy where it will be weaponized. Power struggles often emerge when a narcissist feels their control slipping. They may provoke arguments over small issues, shift blame abruptly, or challenge your character. The instinctive response is to push back harder, to stand your ground vocally. But true control does not require confrontation. It requires non-participation in manufactured conflict. By stepping out of the struggle, you stop reinforcing the pattern. Narcissists depend on emotional back and forth to feel significant. When that exchange disappears, the tactic loses effectiveness. You are no longer rewarding provocation with attention. Refusing bait also protects your nervous system. Constant emotional battles keep your body in a heightened stress state. Over time, this can create exhaustion, anxiety, and emotional numbness. Choosing calm responses allows your system to return to balance. You remain present instead of reactive. This approach does not mean tolerating disrespect. It means choosing the timing and manner of your response. You can address behavior later when emotions are low and clarity is possible. Reacting in the moment often gives the narcissist exactly what they want, proof that they still control your emotional state. When you consistently refuse emotional bait, something subtle shifts within you. You begin to recognize that not every comment requires a reply. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every conflict is yours to solve. The absence of reaction becomes your strength, and the power struggle collapses without you ever needing to fight. Narcissistic communication often feels overwhelming because of how fast it moves. Conversations escalate quickly, topics shift without warning, and emotional pressure builds before you have time to think. This speed is not accidental. Controlling the pace gives control over the outcome. When you are rushed, you react instead of choosing your response. When the tempo is high, clarity disappears and emotional mistakes become more likely. Slowing the pace of the conversation immediately changes the dynamic. You do this not by arguing harder or speaking louder, but by reducing speed. Speaking more slowly, pausing before answering, and allowing silence to exist interrupts manipulation. A narcissist may push for immediate responses because urgency limits your ability to think. They may demand answers, interrupt your sentences, or accuse you of avoiding the issue if you pause. These tactics are designed to keep you off balance. You are not required to respond at their speed. Communication does not become more effective because it is faster. In fact, most emotional damage happens when responses are rushed. By choosing to slow down, you move the interaction from impulse to intention. A pause gives your nervous system time to settle and your thoughts time to organize. Controlling pace also means deciding when a conversation continues and when it stops. You are allowed to say that you need time to think or that you will discuss the matter later. This is not avoidance, it is regulation. Narcissists often equate immediacy with power. When you delay respectfully, you reclaim authority over your participation. Another aspect of pace control is refusing topic jumping. Narcissists frequently shift subjects mid-conversation to create confusion or escape accountability. When you allow rapid transitions, the conversation becomes chaotic. Slowing the pace means staying with one topic at a time or choosing not to follow sudden detours. You can acknowledge what was said without abandoning the original point. Slower communication also reduces emotional escalation. When voices rise and sentences overlap, misunderstandings multiply. Speaking deliberately, with space between thoughts, naturally lowers intensity. Even if the other person remains agitated, your steadiness prevents the situation from accelerating further. This approach strengthens boundaries without confrontation. You are not telling the other person to calm down. You are modeling calm through rhythm. The pace of your speech becomes an anchor. Over time, this consistency teaches others that emotional urgency will not force reactions from you. Controlling pace is also an internal practice. It requires noticing when your body feels pressured. Tight breathing, clenched muscles, or racing thoughts signal that the conversation is moving too fast. Slowing yourself physically helps slow the exchange verbally. A deep breath, relaxed posture, and deliberate speech shift the entire interaction. Many people believe that responding quickly shows confidence. In narcissistic dynamics, the opposite is often true. Confidence is demonstrated through patience. When you are not rushed, you are not controlled. When you are not hurried, you are less likely to agree to things you do not want or say things you do not mean. Over time, controlling the pace of conversations rebuilds a sense of safety. You stop feeling ambushed. You stop replaying interactions afterward, wishing you had said something differently. The conversation no longer runs you. You run the conversation through intention, timing, and calm presence. One of the most counterintuitive communication skills when dealing with a narcissist is learning to say less. Most people believe that stronger communication means more words, better explanations, and fuller expression. In healthy relationships, that can be true. In narcissistic dynamics, excess language becomes a liability. Every additional sentence creates another opportunity for distortion, argument, or manipulation. What begins as honest expression can quickly turn into emotional exposure. Narcissists often weaponize information. They remember details selectively, twist phrasing, and replay statements out of context. When you speak at length, you provide raw material. Long explanations give them something to dissect. Short responses, on the other hand, limit access. You are not being secretive, you are being strategic. Saying less also reduces emotional vulnerability. When conversations stretch on, emotions tend to rise. You may begin calm, but gradually slip into defensiveness, frustration, or self-doubt. Brief communication prevents that emotional spiral. It keeps your energy contained. The fewer emotional cues you reveal, the less leverage the other person has. This does not mean becoming silent or disengaged. It means choosing words intentionally instead of reactively. You speak when necessary and stop when your message has been delivered. Silence after a clear statement often feels uncomfortable, especially if the other person pressures you to continue talking. That discomfort is temporary. What matters is resisting the urge to fill the space with explanations. Narcissists frequently exploit silence by provoking further. They may accuse you of being cold, distant, or disrespectful. These accusations are often attempts to pull more information from you. When you respond by over-clarifying, the cycle restarts. When you remain grounded and concise, the tactic loses strength. Short responses also help maintain emotional authority. You appear steady, not scattered. You are not chasing the conversation. You are guiding your participation in it. Confidence often sounds quiet. It does not announce itself through volume or length. A Another benefit of saying less is clarity. When words are minimal, meaning becomes stronger. Your message is less likely to be misunderstood because there is less to misinterpret. Simple statements leave little room for manipulation. They communicate finality rather than negotiation. This approach can feel unnatural at first, especially if you are someone who values transparency and open dialogue. It may even feel rude or dismissive. In reality, it is a form of self-respect. You are choosing not to overfunction in conversations where mutual respect is absent. Over time, speaking less helps you detach emotionally from outcomes. You stop measuring success by whether the other person agrees or approves. You measure it by whether you stayed true to yourself. The need to convince fades. The need to explain disappears. Saying less also gives you time. Time to observe, time to notice patterns instead of reacting to moments. You begin to recognize that many arguments repeat themselves. When you stop adding new content, those arguments lose momentum. In narcissistic communication, restraint is not silence out of fear. It is silence out of strength. Each word you choose not to say protects your peace. Each pause preserves your clarity. You remain present without being pulled into chaos, and the conversation can no longer consume more of you than you are willing to give. One of the most counterintuitive communication skills when dealing with a narcissist is learning to say less. Most people believe that stronger communication means more words, better explanations, and fuller expression. In healthy relationships, that can be true. In narcissistic dynamics, excess language becomes a liability. Every additional sentence creates another opportunity for distortion, argument, or manipulation. What begins as honest expression can quickly turn into emotional exposure. Narcissists often weaponize information. They remember details selectively, twist phrasing, and replay statements out of context. When you speak at length, you provide raw material. Long explanations give them something to dissect. Short responses, on the other hand, limit access. You are not being secretive. You are being strategic. Saying less also reduces emotional vulnerability. When conversations stretch on, emotions tend to rise. You may begin calm but gradually slip into defensiveness, frustration, or self-doubt. Brief communication prevents that emotional spiral. It keeps your energy contained. The fewer emotional cues you reveal, the less leverage the other person has. This does not mean becoming silent or disengaged. It means choosing words intentionally instead of reactively. You speak when necessary and stop when your message has been delivered. Silence after a clear statement often feels uncomfortable, especially if the other person pressures you to continue talking. That discomfort is temporary. What matters is resisting the urge to fill the space with explanations. Narcissists frequently exploit silence by provoking further. They may accuse you of being cold, distant, or disrespectful. These accusations are often attempts to pull more information from you. When you respond by over-clarifying, the cycle restarts. When you remain grounded and concise, the tactic loses strength. Short responses also help maintain emotional authority. You appear steady, not scattered. You are not chasing the conversation, you are guiding your participation in it. Confidence often sounds quiet. It does not announce itself through volume or length. Another benefit of saying less is clarity. When words are minimal, meaning becomes stronger, your message is less likely to be misunderstood because there is less to misinterpret. Simple statements leave little room for manipulation. They communicate finality rather than negotiation. This approach can feel unnatural at first, especially if you're someone who values transparency and open dialogue. It may even feel rude or dismissive. In reality, it is a form of self-respect. You are choosing not to overfunction in conversations where mutual respect is absent. Over time, speaking less helps you detach emotionally from outcomes. You stop measuring success by whether the other person agrees or approves. You measure it by whether you stayed true to yourself. The need to convince fades. The need to explain disappears. Saying less also gives you time to think, time to observe, time to notice patterns instead of reacting to moments. You begin to recognize that many arguments repeat themselves. When you stop adding new content, those arguments lose momentum. In narcissistic communication, restraint is not silence out of fear. It is silence out of strength. Each word you choose not to say protects your peace. Each pause preserves your clarity. You remain present without being pulled into chaos, and the conversation can no longer consume more of you than you are willing to give. Knowing when communication is no longer productive is one of the most difficult but necessary skills when dealing with a narcissist. Many people stay in conversations far longer than they should because they believe persistence will eventually lead to understanding. They keep explaining, clarifying, and responding, hoping that if they just stay engaged long enough, the conversation will turn constructive. In narcissistic dynamics, this belief often becomes the source of prolonged emotional exhaustion. There is a point where communication stops being an exchange and becomes a drain. You may notice the same arguments repeating without resolution. The same accusations resurface regardless of what was previously discussed. Promises change, narratives shift, and accountability disappears. These patterns are not signs of miscommunication. They are signs that communication itself is being used as a tool for control. Productive communication requires two people who are willing to listen, reflect, and adjust. When one party refuses to do that, effort alone cannot compensate. Continuing to engage under those conditions only reinforces the imbalance. Each attempt teaches the narcissist that persistence, pressure, or emotional intensity will keep you involved. Recognizing unproductive communication starts with observing outcomes rather than intentions. If every conversation leaves you feeling confused, drained, or questioning yourself, that is meaningful information. Healthy communication may be uncomfortable at times, but it does not consistently erode your sense of clarity. When dialogue repeatedly results in emotional chaos, disengagement becomes an act of self-preservation. Narcissists often resist endings. They may escalate conflict when they sense you pulling away. This can include dramatic statements, sudden apologies, or urgent demands for discussion. These moments can create doubt. You may wonder whether leaving the conversation is unfair or avoidant. In reality, stepping away from circular conflict is not abandonment. It is boundary enforcement. Knowing when to stop does not require anger or confrontation. It can be quiet and firm. You are not punishing the other person. You are choosing not to participate in something that causes harm. Disengagement can be temporary or long-term, depending on the relationship, but the principle remains the same. Access to you is not unlimited. There is also a difference between silence and withdrawal. Silence can be intentional and stabilizing. Withdrawal is reactive and emotionally charged. When you choose to pause communication from a grounded place, you are acting with clarity rather than resentment. Ending or pausing communication often brings discomfort because it challenges deeply ingrained beliefs about responsibility. Many people feel responsible for fixing relationships or keeping peace. Narcissistic dynamics exploit this sense of duty. You may feel guilty for choosing distance even when closeness consistently causes harm. That guilt does not mean your choice is wrong. It means you are breaking a pattern. Over time, recognizing when communication is no longer productive strengthens your self-trust. You stop waiting for permission to protect yourself. You no longer need a dramatic reason to step away. The repeated absence of respect becomes reason enough. Walking away from unproductive communication is not giving up. It is recognizing limits. You are acknowledging that dialogue cannot heal what manipulation sustains. By choosing disengagement, you reclaim time, energy, and emotional clarity that endless conversations can never provide. Communicating with a narcissist requires a different mindset than ordinary conversations. It is not about fixing them, convincing them, or finally saying the perfect sentence that makes everything change. It is about protecting your clarity, your energy, and your emotional stability. Each tip you've learned works together to shift the focus away from winning arguments and back toward maintaining control of yourself. When you stop trying to be understood and focus on being clear, you remove confusion. When you regulate your tone, you deny emotional leverage. When you refuse to defend against distortions, you step out of false narratives. When you set boundaries with short, neutral language, you prevent manipulation from taking root. When you refuse emotional bait, you end power struggles before they begin. When you control the pace, you slow chaos into intention. When you say less, you limit access to your inner world. And when you recognize when communication is no longer productive, you give yourself permission to step away without guilt. These tools do not require the other person to change. They work even if the narcissist never reflects, never apologizes, and never understands. That is their strength. You are no longer reacting from emotion or fear. You are responding from awareness. The goal is not silence, avoidance, or emotional distance for its own sake. The goal is discernment. You choose when to speak, how to speak, and when not to engage at all. In doing so, communication stops being something that drains you and becomes something you manage. You may not be able to control their behavior, but you can always control your response. And when your responses are grounded, intentional, and calm, the conversation no longer controls you.